Hi, and good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our webinar on retail and commercial leases. It's really an update with Phil on what's happening on the latest. So I'm Kerry Miles, and I'm the founder and the director of Franchise Ed. But just before we begin, if you've got any questions, please use the chat box, which is down on the right-hand side there. So rather than using the Q&A function, use the chat box. This is actually being recorded, and I'll send you the link by email this afternoon, and you're welcome to send it on to colleagues, and I'll also pop it up on LinkedIn. And if we don't have time for all of your questions, don't worry. We might be able to set up another time tomorrow morning. In fact, actually, we've allocated some time, 7 o'clock a.m. tomorrow morning, Brisbane time, if you've got some further questions that we can't get into today. So we're absolutely extremely fortunate to have Phil Chapman with us here today. He is the go-to man on retail leasing, and he's got a really unique and practical perspective because he works exclusively with tenants. And unfortunately too, we also have access to the latest information because Phil's been in hookups this morning with shopping centres and retail associations. So welcome, Phil. I'm just going to put your video on and unmute you. There you go, Phil. You're here. Great.
Thanks, Kerry. Hi.
Hi, Phil. So today we're going to talk about 4 things. We're going to talk about what to do about the rent in April, how landlords are reacting, how to approach landlords, and what happens after the virus. So I'll hand it over to you now, Phil. Thanks so much.
Great. Thanks, Kerry. And thanks for pulling this together so quickly. The issues we're going through, what everyone's going through right now is very fluid. It's a day-by-day situation, and particularly when we're talking to government, that's at federal and state level, shopping centre council, other key stakeholders, and also the peak retailer industry bodies. And as Kerry rightly said, we just had a phone hook up this morning, and we're talking about the National Cabinet discussions last night, which was on commercial leases, or announcement, I should say. Where hopefully that the other states and territories will follow suit, much similarly to what New South Wales did last week with their seeking amendments, their Part 11, with regard to a bit of a safety net for everybody in relation to a moratorium on landlords stepping in on leases for 6 months for those who fall into default. But let's hope that that's not a magic wand or a silver bullet to resolve what's in front of us, but it's certainly somewhere to say that encourages everyone to take a step back and start to have those conversations. So first things, I suppose, the mantra that and leadership we've been asking for, and in some quarters getting it, is the mantra is, landlords successfully trading retailers and lessees this time next year are worth far more than the passing rent today. And if you're following us on LinkedIn and Facebook and other avenues where we've been out there sending that message out, it's been very clear and well received. So from last night, the National Cabinet came out with 7 points. And a bit convoluted to go through each of the 7 points at this stage, but the first one obviously is to have a temporary moratorium on eviction actions. The second one is that tenants and landlords are encouraged to agree on rent relief or temporary amendments to the lease. And that's the one we want to really talk about today, because that's the message that I've been trying to get out there, and it is being picked up. There's other conversations there around, commercial property owners and how they should be treating the tenants, and also landlords and tenants not significantly affected by coronavirus are expected to honour their lease and rental agreements, and that's only being reasonable as well. So because we've got a limited amount of time today, the first part is, the question is, what do we do about April rent? Well, my recommendation to everybody is, first of all, if you've been shut down for whatever category you're in and wholly affected, sales have tanked, you're closed obviously, then your capacity to pay April rent is obviously nil or certainly partial. If you haven't already, if you've just recently closed, please start communicating with your landlord by phone, and then obviously follow everything up with an email, and certainly with following up with notes after a respective conversation, and keep a file and dialogue going. If you can't pay rent, even though they're insisting that it is paid, let them know it can't be paid, so that at least that dialogue is there. As the next few days and weeks unfold, I think we're going to find that there will be some stimulus come through that may support smaller landlords and retailers affected in those areas as well. But we don't have those answers today. And, throughout this whole process so far, no retail shop lease legislation in any state or territory, or there is no contractual contract contingency that deals with what we've got in front of us. So we're all in the same boat. We're all out there trying to steer through this storm. So talking with your landlord, being open and frank, be an open book with regards to your current financial situation is vital. Now, they may not like what they're hearing, but it's got to be said. We've got to have those adult conversations with our landlords. So with April rent, again, if you can't pay, well, you can't pay. The outcome that comes from there is what I suggest for everybody there, is to suggest that, and I want to take the dialogue of deferral out of the dialogue and conversation with landlords. I'd like you to introduce the words pause on the lease or hibernate the lease. And what I mean by that is, the word deferral suggests that you're going to repay that money down the track. I'd like to take that off the table today and talk about pausing the lease, or hibernating it is the new terminology that's being bandied around for small business, whereby, much like what the banks are doing with where they're going to postpone your payments and then extend the term of the facility or the loan length. Much the same, we'd like to see the lease paused for 3, 4, 5, 6 months, whatever it takes, before the recovery starts. Have no rent paid, and where you've been shut down and you're wholly affected, and then have that term or that period added to the back of the lease. And that's what we mean by a pause and then a restart or a hibernation of the lease. Be very careful of using the words deferral, because your interpretation of deferral and the landlord's may be completely opposite. We've got landlords out there who are saying, okay, well, look, I'm happy to defer the payments, and when it all starts up again, we can have a repayment plan over 2 years with no interest. Well, that's still going to sink some retailers and small businesses. So, that's my holy recommendation in those situations. Where you are part affected, where you're still trading, maybe one of those essential situations where you're still going along, you've still got some sales, although you've been affected, well, then the response needs to be proportionate to that effect. I do encourage you, though, to have a deeper dive into your gross profit dollars and have a bit of projection of where they are going, so that if your sales are down by 30%, simply having a 30% reduction in rent doesn't fully assist you in getting you through this time. Remember too, this is not a free kick for retailers or lessees. We need to find a path where everyone comes out the other side. Otherwise, we're going to have properties out there that are going to look like Swiss cheese, and they'll take a long time to relet. And when this is all said and done, during the recovery, we need to have other retailers functioning and trading successfully around us to make sure that we're creating and the marketplace that we had prior to this virus starting. So be very conscious of that. But by all means, the message here is to deal with the landlords, get on the front foot and talk to them. If you haven't paid April's rent, or the April rent invoice is sitting there and you've done nothing about it, the next 24 hours are critical to having that conversation at least. If on your invoice there it states you've got some electricity to pay, certainly pay that. If you are in a financial position, so pay some outgoings or part payment, consider that. But don't lock yourself in to say that that's what you're going to pay for the next period. I have retailers right now who are trading quite successfully, but we're starting to see as of last week, we're starting to see those sales start to slow down. Traffic in the centres and retail strips is declining, and I'm conscious too that those retailers and lessees, I'm imploring that you should probably write to your landlords today and say, look, you're going to pay half rent on the first, and that you're going to assess sales and traffic throughout the month with the view to pay the rent at the end of the month if you're not affected greatly. But certainly what I'm looking for there is to try and keep some cash flow in your reserves that you may desperately need. If you're paying full rent for April and then we have a full shutdown in a fortnight's time, there's 2 weeks of rent there that I really think needs to go into covering your internal costs before the landlord. So I'm never going to put that out as a statement in writing, because each of your situations are completely separate and different. So, Kerry, just where we are now, I see we've got 6 questions there. Is there any important questions to address now?
I've got a good question here from Anthony. He says, we have proposed that our landlords take our rent out of bank guarantee. The landlord has currently refused based on that this would be a breach of our bank covenants. Therefore, we can't agree to that. What would you advise?
Okay, well, first of all, thanks, Anthony, for the question. And as I say, everyone's going to have a different situation. So you've asked for the landlord to dip into the bank guarantee. So the landlord's obviously got finance over the property as well. And part of that finance is that they have certain securities in place, which is your bank guarantees, personal guarantees, directors' guarantees, etc. Dipping into that breaches their covenants. The landlord needs to go and have those hard conversations with their bankers as well. No one's immune here to what's going on out there. As much as there is for the small, medium enterprises, under 50 million, the government has encouraged the banks to defer or hibernate payments and then extend facilities. Same should go for the landlords. So they need to be having those conversations as well. But certainly if you're being wholly affected, I think the conversation is about whether you're paying rent at all or in part, and try and have that conversation before you dive into your securities. The problem with diving into your bank guarantee is that it's an essential term under your lease. They're going to ask you to top it back up. So you're going to have to replace that bank guarantee. You may be asked to replace that bank guarantee during a period where sales are still tanking, and you've got a bank that's not prepared to reissue or provide that further facility to you. In the instance that the bank guarantee is held in cash, or it's not a bank guarantee, it's a security guarantee, it's a cash guarantee, then that then is a situation where the landlord will ask you to replace that deposit with them. So just be careful there, Anthony. The reason they're saying that is because they've got finance. They need to talk to their banks as well. It's pain for everybody. We've just got to make sure that the pill we swallow each is as small as we possibly can make it for each other. Any more questions, Kerry?
Yeah, so what I'm hearing, Phil, is like, okay, this is what the landlord is saying, but don't take that for an answer. Go back and say, well, no, you need to do something here, and keep the conversation happening and keeping the discussion happening. Is that what you're saying here, Phil? Like, don't say no, don't accept no for an answer. Everyone's in a very challenging position here, and we've all got to come to the table.
A very famous retailer, Barry Bull from Toombul Music, used to write a book, No is Negotiable. And you've just got to keep going until you get an outcome that may not be the outcome that you are seeking, but the outcome that you can both live with. The object of the exercise here is to have that conversation to say, how do we, as a team, the landlord and yourself, you're both partners in this outcome, how do we get to the other side of this and both be in a situation where we're going to be around and we're going to be profitable? We don't want landlords falling over, and we certainly don't want retailers falling over. The market is going to go into a hell of a mess if we have wholesale closures everywhere. I don't think the structure of the financial institutions around can handle all these businesses going to administration in a short period of time. So, everyone's got to step up here, and if your landlord's not stepping up, well, I think they've got to be reminded that they will be outed, and we will be making sure that day when their property goes vacant, then they're going to be a long time vacant. You know, you are
That's
much
right.
more valuable to them today, much more valuable to them next year, up and trading and past the situation, than getting the passing rent today. So,
Yeah.
and there will be landlords, Kerry, that, you know, are self-funded retirees. It's their super funds who rely on the rent to as their personal income. Well, you know, maybe they've got to go back to their bankers and say, listen, I'm not going to get rent from this property for 6 months. How about we extend our loan facility over it, or borrow against the property to fund them through this period? You know, there are other ways and means that we can all get past this.
Yeah. Okay, just a reminder to everyone, we've still got more time for questions. Can you please put the questions in the chat box and not in the Q&A, because the chat box I can just more easily access. I've got it's more of a statement here, so see if you can address it, Phil. If there are no acts or contractual arrangements that deal with the current economic and health crisis, is it simply a situation not predicted or accounted for that means like a force majeure?
Okay, force majeure. Well, first of all, that's been bandied around a lot. And if you go on there and search force majeure on any of the social digital platforms, you'll find that there's, you know, 100 different opinions on it. For mine, and we're not lawyers, we're retail shop lease experts, but the force majeure, very few leases out there will have a force majeure clause in them. Secondly, there is still debate whether a quarantinable disease is cause for force majeure.
Okay.
Now, just to give you an idea on why that's such a grey area, in 2004, the Global Insurance Council started removing quarantinable diseases from business disruption policies internationally. So unless you've got a policy that's grandfathered with those clauses in it, and there's very few of those out there, it's a situation where no one has an answer for this. But let's be realistic here, because there's no cast iron in writing contract or clause that takes us down a path that doesn't stop the parties saying this is uncharted waters, we need to come to a resolution ourselves. And that's what the government, both state and federal, and all the peak industry bodies and leaders are saying. Have that conversation. You've got to start resolving this amongst yourselves. Otherwise it'll be...
Okay, great. Okay, thanks. And I've got a good question here. Do you think there's scope in these extraordinary circumstances for national traders of a similar category to collectively negotiate a fair outcome with national landlords?
If you're across a retail category, like if you said, I'll just use pharmacy for today, but you know, as the largest retail sector out there, if you said, okay, collectively the pharmacy guild's got to go out and on behalf of all their members negotiate a resolution across all the shopping centre council members, it just doesn't function. You know, the problem you have, it's like any situation in the past where we've had in a shopping centre environment or a food court environment where there's a group of traders, might all be different categories, etc., or reasonably similar, have a common problem, and they go to start what's called, you know, a bit of a class action or a group. Any outcome usually only supports the lowest common denominator. So my history tells us that that's the situation you would end up with. Too many of you would end up with a situation that doesn't fully satisfy or misses out on the full benefit of your negotiations yourself.
Okay, so it's not something you'd recommend?
No. It's invariably when you have groups coming together on that common cause and collectively bargaining as such, which you still need the ACCC's approval to do so. To do that, you're probably going to find that majority of people will get less than what they probably could have got under their own steam. Certainly, if you're under a franchise group and brand, by all means, yes, you've got resources there that are collective resources. You've got very common outcomes. You've got your common permitted uses, and perhaps fairly similar base of landlords. Then, yes, by all means, but you'd probably be trying to do that across the landlords as a group. So it'll be Westfield, QIC, Stockland, separately, rather than just across the whole group. There will be a statement come out in the next 24 hours from Shopping Centre Council and the peak retailer bodies. It's not going to be a silver bullet or magic wand. It's going to talk about what we're discussing today, but pushing state governments, and this is all the state governments, excluding New South Wales, who stepped up last Wednesday, is to try and put some sort of safety net under the smaller landlords when they're acting against the smaller retailers or groups, because collectively the feedback we're getting from the larger shopping centres, except for a few individual centre managers, is that there is a wholesale willingness to work with their retailers. They understand that they are going to lose out enormously. Their funds are going to tear apart if they don't have everyone back on deck this time next year. So.
Yeah, good point. Okay, I've got this really good question here too about communicating through the leasing manager. So this person has trouble in that they're generally, they communicate to the leasing manager who earns their income through a percentage of the rent paid. So how can we ensure that the landlord is actually receiving our communication and not being edited by the agent in an effort to protect their own position? What a great question.
Yeah, great question. I'm glad you raised it, because it's something I raised this morning as well. So you're definitely across your knitting. Thank you. Look, a lot of those property managers, it's a real estate agency whose income themselves is derived from their management fee is a percentage of the income that they bring in. They're going to have to suck it up too. But how do you know that your message is getting past them? You don't. So I would, any communication you have, I would be sourcing to not ignore them, not step around them, but advise them that any communication that you've got with them, you're going to copy through to your landlord and be asking to have a conversation directly with your landlord, because this is a contract between you and them. The managing agent is the conduit. So by all means, feel free to step up and around them, but don't ignore them. Include them. If they still keep ignoring you or pushing you back, well, you've given them every commercial courtesy. After you've given that commercial courtesy, go your hardest. Get to your landlord. Get to their lawyer, whoever, their accountant, whoever it is that can break through and get your communication to the decision makers. Do it.
Okay. So just don't stop communicating. You've got to keep pushing through to try and get to the key person. Yeah.
Exactly.
And again, it's that same, don't take no for an answer. Just keep pushing through. This is a different. Oh, you're right, Phil. Did you want to add to that?
No, I was just going to say, when we get this next question, I just want to go back over our 4 topics for today, just to make sure we're covering off.
Oh, okay, yep. So the rent, we talked about that due in April. How landlords are reacting, how to approach landlords, we've covered that pretty well. What happens after the virus? That's a good question.
Okay, let's take. We'll address that one, and then we'll keep pushing through with everyone's questions, because they're the most important ones. Look, after the virus, what I believe is the problem. The real hard discussions and arguments are going to be once it's all called off, for instance, and they say, okay, look, all the shutdowns are now back to reopen. All of a sudden, landlords are going to say, bang, turn the tap back on. We want our full rent from day one. Please start having the conversations now that there's going to be an extended recovery period here. And it may be that, any hibernation or pause on the lease may also have a period where we have a ramp up back to where we were sales-wise. The market isn't going to turn around. People's habits are going to change through this period. And I think we can all attest to that in our own homes and environments, that I don't think we're going to have the market that we had beforehand. So it may take, if I give a sample, if we're all back to work and all the shops are open come September, sales may not come back to the same levels they were beforehand for 6, 9, 12 months. So we've got to be very conscious and be very brutal about your cash flow projections. The conversations you have about your April rent, have them, but as you're talking further into this period of crisis and distress, start talking about the length of time you might think that the recovery may take. Now, we don't know what that is yet, but start having that conversation, because it's just vitally important that we don't have people, who come back to trading, back opening, and all of a sudden they're getting slammed for the full rent when sales only start to trickle back into us. So
yeah,
keep that back in your mind always, please.
Yeah, so there's a recovery period that we need to be mindful of once we all get back to work. Yeah. Okay. I've got a question here from Paul. He says, in your opinion, would valuing a lease for a new term option be considered under the current circumstances, or revert to historical valuations?
Yep. Okay. So I'm assuming that your option is due. So your option is triggered a market rent review, and you're looking at the determination of market rent. On that assumption, that is always at a point in time, which means that it may be the opinion that the current situation takes that into account. Certainly, if it goes back in time, they've got to justify why it's going back in time. And if we're doing forward projections, again, we're stepping outside of the parameters of the specialist retail valuer and what the respective acts in each state and territory state, that a market valuation is at a particular point in time. So be mindful of that. That may actually work for you. I don't actually know how that functions, and I've spoken with a couple of valuers on the weekend, and they were asking the same question of myself. It may be pragmatic to turn around and say, look, we're going to defer the market rent or defer the option period till after all this is over, say for 12 months. Acknowledge your right over land, extend the current term of your lease, and then treat it as if the option was exercisable in 12 months' time. We really don't know there. The valuers are struggling because it is very clear one of the first mantras of a market valuation is that it is at one specific point in time, and that is the first day of the new term, assuming that. So it may be time to push that off, but certainly have a conversation about how the valuer is actually going to function in this period. They don't know either.
Okay. Okay, I've got a question here from Nigel. Do you think landlords will accept percentage rent during a recovery period?
I think that's a great idea. And certainly putting that to them, being open book about what your occupancy cost ratios were beforehand, and certainly saying if you could line up a recovery period that's staggered to reflect that type of recovery, I think that's a perfect scenario, because it is fair to both parties and fair to the outcome that's as sales come back. But in all these discussions with your landlords, you really need to be open book with them. Just another tip I might just reminded me for that question, so thank you. Is there some smarty landlords out there who are pulling out the rule book and saying, okay, if you need some relief or support, etc., we want to see last 2 years P&Ls, we want to see your forward cash flow projections, and we want to see what else you've done and the colour of your onion drawer. Those people are just putting block walls in front of us at a time when no one needs it. I think you need to call those people out and say, listen, that is just putting off trying to support us. It's putting roadblocks in front of us, and all you're going to do is send our business to failure, and we'll just give you the keys back today. And let's just get this sorted. That's the way you're going to be. It's reasonable that you show them what data you have, most definitely. If it means showing them your last year's sales and a direct comparison to this year's sales, and do it by week, not month, and do it by week since February. So you're showing them that there's this real hard decline, or it's a week by week effect that's been introduced to your business through this distress and crisis. Then do it. Don't hold back saying I don't want to show the landlord my figures. It's time to be open book and have those conversations with each other. So thanks for the question.
Good advice. So I've got a question from Catherine. She says, if we're currently in a negotiation with a landlord to sign a new lease, is it advisable to hold off or request a month-to-month lease, or finally stay put? And another part of the question is that if we stay put and our lease has expired, how should we negotiate on a month-to-month basis? Based on what?
Okay, look, And these, look, there's a lot of people caught up. I've got a lot of clients who are caught up. I've got probably 21 odd lease renewals we're right in the thick of at the moment. And there's a couple of avenues here. Some of those people are trading quite successfully through this period. They're not affected. So you can imagine what categories they're in. And landlords are saying, oh, we don't know what to do here. We're actually saying, look, we need to push through with this because their tenure expires in 3 months' time, and the bank is not going to provide the deferral of their rent payment, their loan payments, and extend their loan facility unless they've got a lease in place that satisfies the security there. So in one avenue, it's a good time to push through with the business that's not been affected. If it's a business that's been affected, obviously, there's much more of those than not. Deferring the whole process, say, look, how about we just, once again, let's agree to pause the lease, hibernate it, let's get through this, and then we'll treat the renewal as, on the other side of this, as if this period hadn't happened, is one way. To go month to month, look, the only issue there is perhaps have an exchange with the landlords to agree on what month to month looks like. But I would suggest to say, look, let's just go if our tenure's expired, let's go monthly. But how about, and we need to understand what the rent's going to look like, and whether we're hibernating the rent, and let's have an exchange between the parties that said that even though we're month to month, neither party can give the other party notice without 90 days or 60 days notice. That gives you a little bit of surety around not being kicked out with a month's notice or being churned. But and sort of buys, it gives both parties a bit of breathing space during this period that we're in. So hard one to answer. There's several outcomes here depending on your direct situation, and that might be one where you need to reach out to us and we can have a bit of a one-on-one, and we'll give you some more explicit advice and see if we can support you there.
Great, thanks, Phil. Look, we've come to the end of our sort of 30-minute time frame. There's still quite a few questions. If anyone's got any more questions, keep shooting them through. You can also email me at kerry@franchiseed.org.au. And what we could do is potentially set up another Q&A session tomorrow morning at 7 a.m. So don't be shy, send your questions through. So what I heard from this, Phil, is that it really is about communication, that you don't stop communicating, you keep pushing through to get to the right people. You be open and frank. You use the term open book a lot, so be really open but frank of what you need. Have adult conversations and use the terms you said, Phil, pause or hibernate the lease. These are some key terms that you said that people should use with their landlords. So that takes us to the end. So thank you so much for all your questions. Thank you so much, Phil. You've been amazing to spend some time and be of service here. We really, really appreciate it. If I can help anyone out there, I've got a group for franchisors to come in and they can talk with each other. It's in a Slack group. If you're a franchisor and you want to talk to other franchisors, that's how this actually session started, because a franchisor had a question on leasing. And so I reached out to Phil, and as I said, I'm so grateful that you've taken the time out. As I said, if I can be of help to anyone, shoot me an email. Happy to have a chat. Thanks again, everyone, and I'll send this through with the link so you can review it and send it on to your colleagues. Thanks very much.
All right, bye, Kerry. Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Send through your questions and we'll get to them. Cheers. Bye.
Bye.